Hey guys, welcome to Tyson's Fitness Tips podcast. If you want to lose weight, increase your energy, improve your health and fitness, and look your best, then you have come to the right place. My name is Tyson Brown. I'm a personal trainer, and my job is to help you transform your body by sharing with you the most up-to-date information on health and fitness. I'm going to distill it all down for you into bite-sized actionable steps that you can take immediately to see results quickly. Now, every Tuesday and Thursday, you can expect a brand new episode, which will be a mixture of interviews with top experts from around the world in the fitness space, and as well as solo episodes from myself, sharing with you exactly what action steps you need to take to transform your health, your body, and your life. Also, don't forget to listen all the way to the end of the show, because in the middle, I'm going to share with you a time-saving tip, and it might just be a game changer. I know you're short on time, and this one can save you a lot of time and a lot of energy. So, let's get into the show. What's going on, guys? It is Tyson Brown here, and we are back with another episode of Tyson's Fitness Tips. Now, I've brought back on a really special guest, someone who's a bloody big expert in the fitness industry, if I do say so myself, and someone who I look up to greatly. So I want to bring Tony on today because we want to talk about the latest craze at the moment, which is intermittent fasting. And so, Tony, thanks for coming on today, mate. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me back, Tyson.
Yeah, glad to be here. So, Tony, today I want to bring you on, obviously talk a little bit about intermittent fasting, and because you've obviously been doing it yourself in the past, and you use it with certain clients. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. I've used it quite strictly on and off for about 2 decades, but quite strictly for about 2 years now.
Okay, and are you still following that approach at the moment?
It changes all the time. I think the beauty of a broad topic like intermittent fasting is that there's a number of ways that it can be employed. There's numerous strategies that you can use based on where you are in your life and your work schedule and your family commitments and so forth. And that's what I really like about it. So in heavy blocks of training, I modify it when I'm not training as much, or if it's holidays or if work is busy or family, I change the approach all the time. And it can be as simple as a time-restricted eating protocol or a more water and coffee-only fast for a more prolonged period. So that's what I like about it. So yes, I'm absolutely still doing it in some form.
Cool. And so when you say some form, you've also talked about different methods. So obviously we've got, when you say time-restricted eating, that's a certain amount of time where you're not eating and a certain amount of time where you are eating, which is pretty much the most common approach. Is that right?
Absolutely. And that's also where I start clients, is with a 12-12, because most clients actually really only have a fasting period of about 6 to 8 hours, and that is the time that they're asleep, which for most people in Sydney is somewhere around 5 hours to 7 hours. So that's really the only time that they're fasting. So I move them from that time that they are doing to about 12 hours for a few weeks. And from there, I try and push them to typically around 14 hours. And from the 14-hour period, then we can start to explore different other methods that are either 16 or more, or even 24 hours.
Okay, and so because you start off obviously with the 12 hours, is that just to kind of get them used to everything in a way? Like, so, you know, we don't want to throw them straight in the deep end and say, hey, go for 14 or go for 16 hours, especially when people aren't used to it?
Absolutely. I think most people who I see in my practice are very much used to being told what to eat rather than when to eat. And so the strategy that I'm employing here is not, at least initially, changing what they're eating, but when they're eating it. And moving them from an 8-hour fasting to a 12-hour fasting really does lead to quite significant improvements in health and in body weight. And I think we often ignore that 12-12 because it's not as hardcore as the 14 or the 16 or even just one meal a day. All of those approaches have merits, but they're often a little bit, quote-unquote, too full-on to start a client. And if it's too challenging or too outside of the box, most clients will just reject that out of hand, and therefore you've lost a very viable strategy.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean there. And when it comes to that, a lot of people, they want to know, you know, like when it comes to intermittent fasting, and you talk about stuff like, you know, having the sleep too, a lot of people still ask me the question, like, do you count sleep as a time for fasting?
Well, I think it's one of the easiest times that you can be fasting. It also, what we're trying to encourage clients to do is embrace a more circadian approach to their eating and their exercise and their lifestyle. So the discussion that we're having around hours of eating and hours of fasting falls under a bigger conversation, which is simply humans didn't have access to food while we were asleep. We didn't eat just before bed. We didn't eat just upon waking. We now understand that there's all sorts of hormonal regulation that partitions calories in different ways. So if we eat late at night, the hormone that's trying to tell us to go to sleep also interferes with how well we handle carbohydrate. And this phenomena called evening diabetes has been identified for many years. So what we're trying to encourage clients to do to improve their health is shift their dinner as early as feasible with their kids and work commitments and so forth, and have maybe a 2 or 3 hour period before they go to bed where they're not eating. And then, they're fasting while they sleep, and then delay the breakfast a period of time so that they hit 12 hours and then eventually 13 or 14.
Okay, it sounds like a pretty simplified approach, especially when you educate people, hey, 8 hours is already taken out after you go to sleep, and if you eat a few hours before bed, that's a simple 10 to 12 hours right there.
Well, I think most people's issue, at least who I see in my practice, with their eating, breakfast is usually fantastic, lunch is fantastic, dinner is fantastic, but then it's the after dinner where the extra calories, alcohol and sweet treats come in, because they finish a day, they have dinner, and then an hour later they think, I could probably have something sweet. So rather than starting their fast at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., they're actually eating just before they go to bed, something, and it could be something healthy for them. It could be yogurt and berries and raw honey, but it's still calories and it's still blocking. So the first advice that I give clients is get their eating for the evening done when they're sitting at dinner time. And that includes if they are having something sweet and a dessert, they have it for that period. And then as soon as they get up from dinner and clean up plates and so forth, that's when the fasting starts. And research shows that when you have something sweet or you shift your carbohydrates to the back end of dinner, the ghrelin level of your satiety and tell you it's time to eat again, they are improved. So you don't start sugary and sweet 3 hours afterwards, which is when ghrelin really starts to kick in. So that advice of eating all of your dinner, including your dessert if you're having it, the stopwatch starts, and clients are advised to go for 12 hours from that last bite, or longer once they've conditioned themselves.
Awesome. And that was the big thing, like you said, about the nighttime eating. That's where I tended to fall off too. Like it wasn't dinner, it wasn't breakfast, it wasn't lunch. It was like, those cravings you have at night because people are bored, first of all. They're sitting around, they're watching Netflix, they're doing something, and they always try and occupy themselves. And what do? You try and get a snack. So when you have that cut-off period, I think it's a lot more easy, instead of people trying to manage what they eat, is to not eat anything at all after a certain time.
Absolutely. And I would put that in the context of the health reasons that we've just mentioned. Clients should always be explained why they're doing what they're doing. Otherwise, they will fall back into bad habits within a few weeks. And the health benefits there seem to be profound, but most people fail post-dinner. And many people in our industry who are looking to improve their body composition, they'll often have protein just before bed. So they might have dinner at 7, but at 9 o'clock or 10, they're having another serve of protein just before they go to bed. And that's not advisable either. That just means that the body is a constant state of growth where you're ramping up growth signals 24/7. And that's not a good idea as well. So understanding what we now know about the biology of aging and the biology of longevity, it would be advisable to eat that dinner as early as possible and then get that body into a shutdown fasting state.
Interesting. So one thing I've been seeing lately, though, Tony, that I want to know is, obviously there was the thing about carbs at night make you fat, and then that was kind of disproven because it's all about the calories. But now it's coming back to, like you said, is that eating at night time and interfering with hormones. So what's going on there? Is it still a calorie thing, or how do we think about that?
The answer to that depends on the population group that you're looking at. Mm-hmm. So the early studies that coined this term evening diabetes did not have an exercise component to it. And the study fed the same amount of carbohydrate in the morning versus the evening, and showed that the evening group had markedly elevated blood sugar and insulin levels that enter the diabetic range. We would recommend that if you look at that as a whole, you would say, well, never have carbohydrates at night. But the issue with taking that simplistic viewpoint of the science is that if you didn't have carbohydrate in the day and you have it in the evening, then your muscle and liver glycogen levels are low. And that means that that carbohydrate that you have in the evening is going to be preferentially shifted towards your liver and your muscle rather than body fat. But exercise also renders both of those organs, both muscle and your liver, really sensitive to glucose storage. So the idea that if you have carbohydrate at night, that will go straight to fat and you'll become diabetic. If you've been eating a lot of carbohydrate in the day and your muscle and liver are still very full, if you don't exercise and you're insulin resistant. So my advice for clients who are going to have carbohydrate in the evening and then start their fast would be refrain from carbohydrate earlier in the day, so their breakfast and lunches are not based on carbohydrate. But exercise covers a whole manner of sins. And even if you do have carbohydrate-based meals at breakfast and lunch and you exercise, that will deplete your liver and muscle glycogen if it's been sufficient intensity and duration. And you still will have insulin sensitivity at night despite eating the carbohydrate.
Okay, so that's good to know, because I think a lot of people who obviously listen to this podcast, they do still do some type of weight training. So I just wanted to make sure we got that distinction there, where it's not like, okay, we're talking about, the diabetes factor at night, but if you are someone who's training with weight and you're keeping your carbohydrates low during the day, your muscles are still going to be sensitive at night to uptake those carbohydrates and not be stored as fat.
Absolutely, and research is going on to actually show what we have experienced ourselves. So how do I know this is that we do blood draws on ourselves and prick our fingers in the morning, lunch and dinner after the meals and look at what happens when we exercise versus not. But research down at John Hawley's lab in Melbourne at ACU, they're doing what's called circadian exercise nutrition studies. So they're looking at different types of exercise in the day and different types of feeding and looking at the blood sugar and fat responses to that. We don't have the results of that research yet, but that's the group who's doing the exciting stuff.
I think it'll be interesting to see when it actually comes out to see what the results are, because it's always fun to look at neuroscience, eh?
Absolutely, and his group's a hotbed for great stuff.
That's very cool. And so, Tony, I get a lot of questions about intermittent fasting. Obviously you've talked about the time-restricted feeding. Then there are other methods, like your method, deficit day system, and things like that. And a lot of people ask me, what are the benefits? Like, is one better than the other? And I always tell my clients, well, it depends on what you're after, first of all, and secondly, what you can stick to the most. But what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that you have answered that quite correctly, and my answer is always the same. What are you after, and what can you stick to for a period of time? And are you the kind of person that finds modifying nutrition challenging? Because there's many approaches here, and not every approach can do everything, despite proponents who advocate one thing over another. The science is that humans have evolved to have periods of energy intake and energy deprivation, and to be able to exercise efficiently in those states. So if we work from that premise, then there's a number of ways that we can alter the week, Monday through Sunday, where you have higher energy days or lower energy days or fasting days that really fit into a client's lifestyle. And I think that's for a benefit of one approach over another. It would be simply that, and that is, it's so easy to tailor-make a strategy like this based on your lifestyle and work and your likes and dislikes without actually discussing food and what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat very much. It's very difficult to change what people eat. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. If we can alter the time access that they have to food, or make them metabolically flexible such that they can go long periods of time without energy and exercise so that they become good fat burners, to me, that's all ticks in the box that make it a really viable strategy.
Okay, very cool. So would you ask, let's say we've talked to them about there's time-restricted feeding, there's alternate day fasting, things like that. Would you ask them what they think they would be most suitable to do first to see which ones they're more open to?
Yeah, absolutely. You've said it rightly, that if a client is unable to stick to something for a period of time, then that methodology is not a viable strategy.
Sorry, Tony, I think I muted myself. Yeah, right. So obviously, it's not a viable strategy for somebody who, if they're not, going so long without food and you're trying to tell them to restrict their calories so much. If they can't handle that, then there's no point in them even attempting to try it.
If a client gets so hungry that they want to eat off their arm by dinner time and then overeat, then that strategy either needs some tweaking, or complete elimination. The goal should be clients find it a no-brainer, and it should fit in with their lifestyle. The majority of people that we see, we're not dealing with 20 to 25-year-olds who live with their parents and all meals are prepared for them. We're dealing with people with work pressures, family pressures, sleep pressures, stresses, and so forth. So the strategies that we need to use have to be consistent with what a client is happy to give you. And that's where I think the intermittent fasting protocols are much better, quote unquote, better than traditional caloric restriction and dieting, because we're not saying we don't want you to eat bread. We don't want you to eat meat. We don't want you to eat dairy, on and on and on. These are restrictive, and clients might find that they can do this for a period of time, maybe weeks and months, but it's not something that they're going to do ongoing. And in that case, if they can't do it for 12 months, it's a worthless strategy.
I like how you said that. Like, a lot of people want to see the short-term results, but at the end of the day, if you can't stick to something long-term, then there's no point in trying that, because I think it's 95% of the population who lose weight actually put it back on. And it's just because they follow these, short-term strategies, which do provide results, but if it's not sustainable, what's the point in sticking to it?
Short-term fixes, they're not terribly difficult to implement with clients. You just you stop the things that they like having. They think that it's magic. They think that they enjoy that they're on something so strict, and the secret was the carbohydrates, or the secret was the animal proteins, or whatever it was. But then 4 or 5 weeks later, they will really want that carbohydrate. And the strategies are worthless. It's not sexy, but it is the reality that the protocols need to be adhered to for very long periods of time to see true changes in body composition and weight stability, and where clients are happy with where they are.
Very interesting just thinking about that, because I think a lot of people, it's hard because when we try and explain that it's supposed to be a long-term thing, a lot of people can't think of the long-term perspective because they want everything now.
Yeah, it's the society that we live in, and we need to take that into consideration when working with our clients, that we're in an instant gratification society and clients want results immediately. It's the enemy of true success in this game, because health and body composition and muscle and bone, they take months, if not years, in the making. And sometimes it's easier working with athletes in that respect, because they understand that the process of getting to the Olympics takes a decade, not a week. Whereas most people look at the physiques of the athletes in the Com Games and the Olympic Games and think, I really want that. I'm going to do what they're doing and expect to see what they've been doing for 12 years with blessed genetics. And they want that in a few weeks.
It's all about that short-term desire, isn't it? And so there are a lot of myths that are out there at the moment, Tony, when it comes to intermittent fasting, like good myths, not good myths, but myths saying that intermittent fasting is the end-all, be-all approach for weight loss at the moment, right? It's just one of those fads. But at the end of the day, when it comes to fat loss, is there anything special with intermittent fasting compared to a caloric restricted diet?
Probably not. I see it more in its sustainability, and that is most people of the public are able to stick to a modification to their eating plan over maybe 2 times a week, 3 times a week. In the case of obese clients, it could be just once a week. And they can do that month in, month out. But if I say, Tyson, you're going to stop eating rice, potatoes, bread, legumes, honey, dairy, that might last 6 weeks. So in terms of a sustainability, the eating approach, to my mind, has longevity written all over it. But if you were to ask just a purely academic question, and that is, if we were to do 2 days of intermittent fasting and do a 5-2 or a deficit day, or just even fast for 2 days of the week, but we were to match the calorie deficit of somebody who just restricts each day, Monday through Friday, and eats more freely on the weekend, weight loss is identical. And research has gone head-to-head and looked at the 5-2 style approaches with caloric restriction and shown pretty much the same kind of results. So it's academic, And that's why in the clinic, we're always asking questions. Does this sound like something you can stick to over the weeks and months? Does it sound good to you? Would you be able to do this? And if the answer to that is yes, rock and roll.
Awesome. And what about when people, like, let's say, how long do you always say give it, like, to try for? Because a lot of people think, oh, well, if it didn't, like, you know, I get hungry, I wake up and I'm hungry. I'm like, well, you know, your body is used to eating at that time, so it's not going to change overnight. How long do you try and educate people to say, hey, stick to this for a certain amount of time before you say it's not working for you?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and one that should be brought up before the client even starts a new approach. The whole machinery of metabolism takes at least a week to start to shift substrate. So essentially what is happening, and an individual should always understand this, is that we typically run on carbohydrate-based fuels. From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, and then most of our sleeping period, the brain is reliant on glucose and our organs are reliant on carbohydrate. When we start to go into an intermittent fasting approach or pure fasting, the body quickly shifts from glucose metabolism to ketone metabolism. And that period of time to get the enzymes, the transporters, all of the machinery in the muscle and in the brain used to different substrates will take a minimum of a week if somebody is strict, but usually a few weeks. And in the muscle, it probably takes much longer than that before you start to see performance returning. So I would explain that at the beginning, that it is a period of time in adaptation. My experience, though, that most people are very reliant on carbohydrate-based fuels. Breakfast is carb dominant, lunch and dinner and so forth. They're the people who find it hardest to go from carb-based 3-4 meals a day, maybe even with snacks, to intermittent fasting. They're the people who want to eat off their leg, and they're the people who overeat at dinner when it's time to eat again. So I would then actually use a transition period where, regardless of how much carbohydrate that they're eating in a day, we would work that out. We would, over a period of even up to a month, start to reduce that. So it would be classified as a quote-unquote low-carb diet, which would be anywhere perhaps daily eating under 120 grams a day, just as an arbitrary number, and maybe even some meals where they're not eating big sources of carbohydrate. From that point, they'll be able to be more, again, quote-unquote fat adapted, so that they can shift to fasting much easier.
Okay, right. Okay, so it's I think people need to go and listen to that. Just listen to that bit again, so they understand about what's going to be happening during this process. Because, like you said, it's not an overnight thing. The body's got to be able to shift over time to be able to get used to this new style of eating that you're using, especially shifting from carbohydrates to fats.
Absolutely, and that's called the metabolic switch. Most people never switch. They never turn it on. It's from the moment they wake to the moment they go to bed, it's carbohydrate-based fuels. It takes a period of time to switch that metabolic drive from carbohydrate metabolism to ketone and fat metabolism. And even longer, that exercise starts to feel good again. But that is essentially our DNA. It's hardwired into us. If we couldn't hunt for long periods of time or gather for long periods of time in the absence of energy, in the absence of carbohydrate, we would not have survived as a species. So for a million years of evolution, our brains and muscles and organs are hardwired to be able to switch from eating, hunting, gathering, to doing all of those in a completely fasted state. So patients will be rewarded, and you will be able to exercise for prolonged periods without any food whatsoever.
Good to know with regards to that. So one thing that I've noticed has been popping up more and more is obviously the ketosis is another trend at the moment, but a lot of people are trying to combine those things together, ketosis and intermittent fasting. What are your thoughts on that? Like obviously you can follow intermittent fasting or ketosis, and as long as you're in a calorie deficit, you'll lose weight, but is there any benefit to adding those two things together?
I think they work synergistically well, and the reason why they work well together is that a side effect of being in ketosis or elevating your blood ketone levels is that when they get above 0.6, 0.7 millimolars, they act as a natural appetite suppressant. Essentially, what we are trying to do from a health perspective is elevate our blood ketone levels really as high as possible, and that number should be over 0.4 when we start to see physiological benefits. These ketone bodies were thought really up until a few years ago that they're just an alternative fuel, just like glucose. The brain can accept them and use them just like carbohydrate. But we're now realizing that ketone bodies by themselves are what's known as signaling agents that tell other systems to do certain things. And this is particularly important. So when your ketone levels get really above 0.5, 0.6, we're starting to see them engage with other organ systems to reduce inflammation, reduce oxidation, talk to your DNA, quiet growth signals that are involved in cancer pathways and so forth. So we're really scratching the tip of the iceberg in terms of understanding the benefits here. So when you are in ketosis or cycling in and out of ketosis, which is what I do, and you go into fasting, you elevate your blood ketone levels very quickly. But there's also no historical evidence that being in a state of ketosis long term is any better than going in and out of it. From an evolutionary perspective, humans would have gone in and out of ketosis all the time. We wouldn't have been in it for long periods. Sure, there would have been starvation, and sure, there would have been absence of carbohydrate fuels. But those periods or those months would have gone when fruits were available and carbohydrate-based fuels were. So we would have gone in and out. We have a mouse study that came out at the end of last year that showed that this cyclic 2 weeks ketosis, 2 weeks normal eating and so forth improved longevity and brain function in mice. We don't have human studies yet, but it's a really exciting thought that if being in ketosis doesn't really suit you, it might be something that you could go in and out of. And that's certainly the approach that I do. I have 3 kids, so they enjoy lasagna on the weekend. So I eat with them and I eat their food so they don't think I'm a freak. And then on other days, I will change my kind of food and shift into more ketotic diet, do a little bit more exercise in the fasted state and get my ketone levels back up. So for somebody with kids, that works perfectly for me.
That's great. I think it's a good idea. Like you said, it's more of that cyclical thing. We try and, at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is replicate how our ancestors were, because that's what our biology has been evolutionized to do, right?
Absolutely. Intelligently as we can mimic our evolutionary history with simple things about not staying up too late at night, not eating meals in the middle of the night, not engaging with a lot of blue light before bed, trying to keep a stricter circadian rhythm, wake up at the same time, go to bed at the same time. And these kinds of fasting approaches, I think they really support what we have been doing and what is hardwired into our DNA to do.
Sorry, I'm muting myself again. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying there. So it's more about taking it slow at the start, trying to mimic, obviously, like you said, what our ancestors do, but don't try and overwhelm yourself to try and do everything at once. Like there's the people who like to follow the keto, who like to follow intermittent fasting, who like to just restrict. But whatever it is, don't try and overwhelm yourself with too much. Start with one thing at a time before you add in the next thing and the next thing.
To avoid zealots, because the fitness and health industry is full of zealots. And each camp often has a very good message that's worth considering. And that could be a keto, fasting, paleo, plant-based. Each of these camps and viewpoints have merits, have things that are worth considering, things worth pondering, and things worth trying. But in all of those viewpoints, there are true zealots, and it's really not worth engaging with people with such strong viewpoints. It's worth trying these things for yourself. No two people are the same. It does take time, but it should be consistent with your lifestyle, your work, your family pressures, where you are in life, and it should try and suit your goals. And you give it a try. Give it a period of 4-6 weeks, and does it work? Is it effortless? Can you stick to it? Do you feel better? And do try and get some blood metrics so you can just check how some of these protocols affect known risk markers of, say, type 2 diabetes, inflammation, and heart disease.
Very cool. And so I was just about to ask you that. So obviously before starting any of these approaches, recommend obviously going to get your bloods checked just to get a kind of a baseline measure. Is there anything else you recommend to people who are willing to look at, trying any of these things? Is there anything you suggest to them before they actually start on any of these journeys?
It's useful to take in their heritage and their habitual diet prior to this, You don't want to be recommending things that is so outside of what their other family members are doing or eating, or what their kids are eating and so forth. So I think taking a good history is very, very important. You don't want to do anything that's too radical. It's also worth having a whole battery of blood tests, because some people do not do well with intermittent fasting. Some people do not do well with ketosis. And that number seems to be about 10 to 20% of the population. We don't have very good statistics, but experts who have worked in ketosis for a long time throw around that number. So you would have a look at various blood lipids, glucose levels, glucose control, inflammation, and you would monitor that 3 months into the protocol change and see how everything's going.
Excellent, good to know. And that was the one thing I had to do when I first tried it, was that I found my LDL obviously like skyrocketed after following the ketosis, but it's obviously because of the saturated fats in my genes, but I was wondering, I haven't tried it, whether it would be better on a poly and monounsaturated fat, more towards the ketosis side.
That would be worth considering, that you can change your fat type and see if that affects it. I would do that first. But it's also worth considering that your LDL might have gone up in conjunction with your HDL, and your triglycerides might be very low. And we don't really have any evidence at all that an elevated LDL and HDL, but suppressed triglycerides, has any negative effect on heart health.
Interesting. So, well, for a selfish question, what would you recommend in that perspective then, if they were both high, the LDL and the HDL, my triglycerides actually did go down, what would be your recommendation at that point?
I probably wouldn't intervene at this point. We just don't have any data at all that the elevated LDL and its transporter to remove it, HDL, but low blood triglycerides, have any negative effect on heart health at all. When you rule out genetic studies, drug trials and so forth, you rule those out. We don't have any compelling data at all that that's problematic.
Very interesting. Good to know. Well, Tony, I really appreciate you coming on today and covering, the myths, how to get us started, the different types of intermittent fasting. I think we actually covered a lot on this podcast, which is really enjoyable. Now, for people who want to find out obviously more about your work and what you do, where's the best place for them to find you? Because you've just launched something pretty cool, so why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, that's right. So just this week, we've launched a protocol that's called Insight, and you can find that from our website, which is just my name, tonyboutagy.com. And essentially, it's for people who get overwhelmed with the amount of information that comes out. So each day, I do a post on studies that I think are pretty cool across lifestyle medicine, exercise, nutrition, fitness, so forth. And I post the study and make a few comments on it. And the goal is that each day when you have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, we give you 15 minutes of really evidence-based, relevant, just out research that is not bro science and is not someone's opinion. It's some rock solid science. So I'm really excited about that product, and yeah, it's just launched this week.
Awesome. Guys, I'm going to put that in the show notes because I really recommend that you sign up to this. It's a very, very affordable price, and you get to learn from some of the, the best expert in the field, which is awesome. Now, Tony, you mentioned one thing there that I really want to quickly cover that I know a lot of people ask: drinking coffee during the fast. What, can I drink a black coffee? What's going on there?
Well, that's a good question. I drink coffee, black coffee, during fasting, and I recommend it to clients. It's a natural appetite suppressant. Again, it depends on what you're after. When you are fasting, you really are trying to ramp up your blood ketone levels because of the health benefits. You're also trying to put your organ systems into shutdown. The argument for not including coffee is that coffee has to be metabolized through the liver, and that by definition means that your liver is not put into a state of rest. However, research shows that when you do have coffee, the polyphenols that are found in coffee increase ketone production, and they increase the very thing that we're trying to get from fasting, which is a process called autophagy, where the cells identify damaged cells and destroy them, self-eat them. So I think unless we get better evidence that we include black coffee during the fasting period.
Well, guys, you heard it here first. Good to know that we can always have that nice black coffee while we're having our fast. Awesome. All right, Tony, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Guys, give us a listen again. Go to the show notes. Go and get Tony's new information course that's coming out because it is awesome. Until next time, I'll speak to you guys then.
Thanks, Tyson.
No worries. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. Now, I've got a special gift for you. If you want to learn how I managed to lose 10 kilos and keep it off, then I've got the perfect treat for you. I've got a free intermittent fasting cheat sheet that I share on my website that shows you exactly how to diet effortlessly with intermittent fasting and fit it into your busy lifestyle. And more importantly, this is the exact guide that I follow every single day that allowed me to lose 10 kilos of body fat and keep it off 4 years later. So head on over to www.tysonbrown.com.au and pick up your free cheat sheet today and learn how to fit intermittent fasting into your life and diet effortlessly. Once again, that's www.tysonbrown.com.au. Opt in for the free cheat sheet and I'm going to send it straight to your inbox for free. Until next time, speak to you guys then.